Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Spawn Part 2. People have been asking me to record Spawn because of the fact that Spawn is coming out for Mortal Kombat 11, and people have been ranting, like screaming about it, right? Like every single time the comments come in as a notification on my phone, it's like, will you cover Spawn? Will you do more Spawn? Okay, so for those of you guys who are playing catch up, we already did Spawn Part 1. We did it last year, actually. And that one's there if you guys want to go check it out. And we'll probably create a playlist because we're going to test this, right? We're going to test bed this. This whole week, we're going to do Spawn as backup stories, right? We're going to do our main normal comics that we usually do, but we're going to have secondary videos that are all going to cover Spawn, at least a whole bunch of Spawn stuff. Because I'm curious to see, is it that people really want to see Spawn, or is it just like a really small number of people really want to see Spawn? I'm kind of curious about that. With Spawn Part 2, this is really kind of Spawn getting into like the meat and potatoes of what his character's about. The first arc is called Questions, really, and it's like 4 parts, right? So you get the origin of Al Simmons as Spawn, that kind of thing, and that's what we cover, that's what we titled the video. This one is kind of him off to the races playing his role. The funny thing about this is that this is probably 6 issues into it, and back in the 1990s, the character of Spawn was part and parcel to how comics existed back then, insofar as the villains weren't the most incredible thing ever. The cool thing is that like they got really interesting as time went on, right? So the way this initially picks up is we pick up with a guy named Overt Kill. Now, Overt Kill does not actually get an origin until you get into the Curse of Spawn stories. And the Curse of Spawn was kind of like a spin-off series, so it's like Punisher and then Punisher War Journal, a spin-off series based on the character of Spawn, but it's designed to kind of explain a lot of the other characters that are there. This guy, Overt Kill, was originally just a guy named Nicholas, who basically around 13 years old started making a name for himself as more or less a hitman for the mob. Ultimately, he ended up killing the wrong guy, and his head was caved in, and then cybernetic enhancements were offered to basically fix him and then make him more capable, right? So he was like the $1 million man. But as it stands right now, he's really a major force and a major hitman for the various mobs that are out there. And the reason why that matters is because Overt Kill gets his name from literally just being over the top, right? So he's like the Tremor brothers from Smokin' Aces. I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie. If anything, he's kind of a pastiche on like the over-the-top nature of characters back during the early 1990s. Hence the reason why he looks so advanced is because if you go and you read Marvel comics, especially Marvel, during the 1990s, everybody had pouches, everybody looked all technologically advanced. Ant-Man is a perfect example of that. He looked like a space marine from Alien 2. But Overt Kill kind of gets his name from the fact that he's literally a one-man army. His enhancements really put him over the top in comparison to like most conventional groups that are out there. And so the result of that is what we end up doing here is basically jumping to a couple of mob henchmen. And the reason why is because with Spawn doing his thing, he's basically been taking out the mob. That what you have here is you essentially have a scenario whereby Al Simmons, when he was turned into Spawn, what we covered in part 1, is he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he decided to use his powers and to go forward and to like fight crime and defeat bad guys and so on and so forth, the energy, the finite amount of energy he has in his body will dwindle down, and then he'll die, and then his soul will belong to Malboja, the person that more or less created him, and then he'll lead Malboja's army of Hellspawn. If he does nothing and allows his power to basically just kind of go on forever and ever and ever, then basically he'd be standing idly by and watching the world burn. It's kind of an interesting scenario, and that's where you sort of get into what made Spawn so intriguing, right? And we'll talk about that here in a minute once we get into the fight between himself and Overt Kill. But what you end up having is these various henchmen who show up and really start hitting up, you know, one of these drug addicts, and it's kind of like, give us the rundown on who this guy is, like who it is that's taking out our guys, so on and so forth. And this guy, Freddy, basically responds by saying, okay, give me the drugs that I want, and then like, I'll give you the information that you're looking for, you know, and it's kind of like, no, give us the information we're looking for or we'll kill you, and then we'll give you your drugs if your information is worthwhile. Of course, once he drops the info, they end up killing him anyway. But what he basically reveals is that Spawn is more or less taken up residence in the various homeless sectors, right? The sense that it's kind of a cast-off or sees himself that way. And it's kind of cool because when this information is dropped to basically a guy named Tony Twist, he's the one that kind of says, okay, let's go find this guy and let's take him out, right? Because this guy's taking out members of our group, of our mob, the other Dons, the other mob bosses out there, want this guy taken care of. He's on our turf. It's our job to eliminate him, right? Otherwise, they'll see Tony Twist as weak. They'll eliminate him and replace him with somebody they think they can get the job done. And so because of that, what we end up doing is jumping to Spawn, basically when he ends up, you know, having a conversation with a couple of homeless guys. And this is where things get cool, right? Because what he says here is that when he listens to these homeless guys talk, you know, they're kind of like, man, you know, you seem kind of weird and kind of strange and so on, you know, and I'm sure you've got a weird story, but like we all have backstories. Who cares what we were before? What matters is who we are now. now. And it's kind of interesting. When you look at this, it's almost like homeless people are more forgiving of a human being than like the average person out there, right? People are, for the most part, exceedingly judgmental. You can do whatever you want in this life so long as I agree with it. But with these homeless guys, it's you have your own story, sure, but like so do we. And like we've all done terrible things, but that doesn't define who we are right now, right? Like what makes us who we are is what we do in this moment going forward. People can change. And so it's kind of interesting that Spawn can find redemption in essentially the cast-offs of society. And that's what makes him feel at home here. That's why he spends so much time hanging around the homeless population, is because one, he can fit in. There's already a lot of people there who look deformed. So if it came down to one of those things where he needed to basically hide his costume and show his true face, and people are going to be like, man, that guy looks rough. But like, so does John over there too. He looks rough too. So like, whatever, man, like everybody's got scars, you know, so he can kind of blend in with the crowd, but he can also kind of be at home. When Al Simmons came back, you know, what we covered in the first video, when he came back, he found that his wife, Wanda, had married his friend Terry and started a family, right? So he doesn't have a home there anymore. There's nowhere for him to go back to. And so he's just kind of free floating in this world now. And this is the only real place he can call home. What this does is it leads to these two henchmen basically tracking down this location where Spawn was last to have been believed. And then they end up killing one of the homeless guys. And in response to that, Spawn basically shows up. And it's kind of like, okay, one, you're going to tell me who it is that's tracking you and then, or tracking me, and then you're going to tell me why. Now, this is one of the things you kind of ran into when it came to the early dialogue of the Spawn comics. As cool as Spawn is, the early writing was a little rough. It was a little like cliche in terms of how it was done. But, you know, for the most part, Todd McFarlane's first foray into like a wholly owned character, he could do anything he wanted to. And that's why people who read Spawn they absolutely adore Todd McFarlane, because they watched him grow as a creator as he was creating Spawn, right? So if you were somebody who started reading Spawn with issue number 1 and you've been reading it ever since, you were growing with Todd McFarlane as he was doing it, right? So you were watching him grow in real time. And it's a cool experience, right? To be alongside a creator as they're getting better and better at their craft. But the result of this is that basically this particular guy that Spawn catches up to ends up offing himself. And in response to this, they're deemed to have been failures by Tony Twist. And so meeting with the rest of the mob bosses, it's okay, let's start calling in the heavy hitter, right? Let's call in Overt Kill. Is anybody against this? And they're all like, nope, take this guy out, right? Like, kill this guy. Well, this has gone on long enough. And so with Overt Kill being called in, he ends up meeting Spawn, you know, kind of at these docks. And initially you would kind of look at this and say, okay, so like if you look at it in hindsight, like you look at it Spawn as you know him now, your initial thought would be, okay, he's going to overcome that guy quick, fast, and in a hurry. But the important thing to understand is during these early stories, Spawn was still learning what he was capable of, right? He was still learning about his powers. There were things that he could do that he didn't know he could do. The other part of this is that with Spawn using his power and depleting his necroplasm, basically his energy, that if it goes on too long, if he uses too much power, it drains to zero. He dies, goes to hell, and leads the forces of Malboja, right? So this is where the Spawn comic got super intriguing. It's a guy who can conceivably do pretty much anything, but chooses not to. It's one of these things where it's like if Superman acted like Batman, more or less. That's kind of how this goes down. The issue with this is that Overt Kill is just kind of this overwhelming force for any standard guy out there using any real measure of hand-to-hand combat, especially if they don't really seem to be as strong as Overt Kill is. And so the initial foray between himself and Spawn sees Spawn, of course, like ripping his arm off or ripping his hand off, but then like Overt Kill immediately gets the upper hand and just starts pummeling him, right? Just absolutely starts pummeling Spawn and then leaves him for dead. Now, this is an important thing because Overt Kill believes that Spawn is dead, right? He's just kind of like, I've done my job. This guy's dead. Like, we're just kind of moving on and doing our own thing. The reality of this is that it seemed as though the sensors that Overt Kill uses to determine the heartbeats of others to ensure that like they actually are dead appear to basically be malfunctioning. And so in his mind, Spawn is dead, when in reality, Spawn is not. But what he has come to face with is the fact that there are people out there that can just overwhelm him, right? Especially if he's not really using his abilities. Now again, if he used all of his various powers, he would have destroyed this guy, right? Like Overt Kill would have been crushed quite readily. But Spawn kind of goes back to the drawing board and says, okay, I don't really want to use my powers unless I absolutely have to. So like, I'm gonna go do what I do best. I'm gonna grab a bunch of weapons and just like shoot stuff up. And that's why Spawn looks so cool, right? Because this single page, for example, when he's got like his chains, he's got like his ammo, he's got his guns, these are like hallmark depictions of Spawn, right? Like these are the kind of things you think of when you think of Spawn, especially back in the 1990s, just like over the top, impossibly large guns, just different things like that, right? So the result of this is that locating Tony Twist, you know, he really just kind of like shoots the place up. But there is a little bit of a plot thread that's introduced here. And this is what Todd McFarlane would do over the course of the early stories. A lot of what took place between the time that Al Simmons died died and then came back, we didn't really know, right? So like in the early stories, we didn't know how he died. We just knew that he was killed. We didn't know who pulled the trigger. We just knew that somebody pulled it. We didn't really know a lot of these intricacies, these nuances of his backstory. And that's one of the things that made him so intriguing. And that's why Todd McFarlane's Spawn succeeded so well, because it took everything that was popular about like Wolverine, for example, the mysterious backstory, things like that. But it took that mystery of like what's going on with this character and then stretched it on. Not too long that people lost interest, but it didn't give us so much so fast that there was no more mystery anymore, right? So it was kind of the perfect balance, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, which I think is really a testament to how good of a writer Todd McFarlane was. But what we kind of get is a sort of flashback where he recalls a guy who basically had a gun and killed him. Again, we're only really shown this person in terms of like bones and a skull and so on. So we don't really know who this guy is, but we know there was some kind of vendetta, right? Like I would have killed you for free. You know, nobody would have had to pay me for it, you know, and this guy considers Al Simmons to have been a traitor. So again, kind of building on this mystery, this intrigue, this origin that we're not fully sure of. And so as a result of that, he ends up basically tracking down Tony Twist, ends up shooting up his office, and then basically says like, have Overkill meet me at this location at midnight. I'm not done yet. The two of us are going to go forward and do our thing, right? So it's kind of cool. You know, it's pretty interesting because what this does is it leads to basically Overkill showing up here. And when Overkill shows up to basically face off against Spawn yet again, Spawn kind of learns his lesson. It was very easy to get carried away with himself in the first conflict, right? To just kind of assume he could get the upper hand on this guy, as opposed to kind of treating him with the sort of respect that you have to treat somebody with when you're engaging in any sort of physical altercation, right? You don't know what they're capable of. And so it's not really like treating them with respect as a person, like I'm not going to hit you as hard as I can. It's, I don't know what you're capable of, so I'm going to assume you're capable of anything and plan accordingly. And so realizing the cybernetic enhancements that benefit Overkill, one of the first things Spawn does is stab him through his cybernetic eye. And this has two major impacts. The first is that it takes away his cybernetic enhancements when it comes to his vision. And then two, it removes his depth perception. And so depth perception, you know, losing that basically means he doesn't know how far away Spawn is. For the most part, it's all a two-dimensional space now. And it's kind of cool, right? Because Spawn could be like 15 feet away, Spawn could be like 5 feet away. The only way that Overkill could judge this is the size of the objects in relation to Spawn around him, right? And so as a result of that, the two of them sort of going at it, you know, and of course, like Spawn sort of taunting Overkill by basically like showing what his true face looks like when he's, you know, burned all to pieces and so on and so forth. But in this moment of arrogance, an Overkill basically gets carried away with himself. Spawn ends up breaking out this colossal gun and blows a hole through this guy and essentially kills him, right? His whole cybernetic system starts shutting down, and then Spawn's like done, and then just kills him just like that. It's a quick fight, right? It's very, very fast and very, very quick. And it makes sense that it would be that way. This is really where it ends, right? It's kind of like, okay, so like Overkill's dead. Spawn's like, the cops are going to be called, so it's time for me to bail out. But what this was designed to do, and the reason why it happened so quickly, is if you're not really familiar with like McFarlane's writing style, you would look at this and you would say, okay, so this was like a really rushed story. When in reality, it wasn't. What it was designed to do is to show Spawn can be defeated if he doesn't pay attention to what he's doing. Just because Spawn has these abilities doesn't mean that he's all-encompassing, impossible to destroy, right? Especially if he's not using his abilities. What it does is it's designed to kind of build on the nature of the character and say, there's more to Spawn than just a guy who can like use his necroplasm and his chains and hooks and things like that. Using your mind is just as important as using your body effectively. And it's a really, really cool moment because it builds on the nature of the character. That's one of the reasons why it proved to be so resoundingly successful. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, keep a lookout. Tomorrow we will continue our Spawn videos. Peace. I want to say thank you to all of the new patrons who have joined patreon.com/comicsexplained. I want to give a shout out to Henry, Young Typhon, Elias G, David JS, Jacob H, Ben, John H, Jason C, Austin S, Austin H, James O, Chris T, Matt N, Jeff R, Joey M, Steven Z, Sloth Like Lou, David C, John H, Lean and Mean. That guy asks questions all the time. Adam K, Genosis 916. I want to say thank you to all of you all. This list is growing all the time. Thank you for joining the Patreon.